But I'm seeing young people. When now I reach out or talk to some young folks from any countries in Africa, Nigeria, Congo, South Africa, Senegal, you are seeing these young people who are really, they have a hunger. They are very hungry. They went to see change. They went to be part of how the world is changing. And I like to think that if these young people full of enormous talent have access to quality education, opportunity, trust me, they'll actually, we should not be seeing Africa as a, let's say, a burden or challenge, but a continent full of opportunities.
Welcome to another IATP Explainer. This week we are joined by Mulala Nguramo. Mulala currently works at the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council. He is also a non-resident fellow at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and he is the first Congolese graduate from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. According to almost every index, corruption in Central Africa is common. How does corruption impact the lives of people in Central Africa?
Yes, absolutely. Corruption, it's actually one of the biggest obstacles to the development of Africa. As a matter of fact, if you look at almost the published indexes, let's say by the Mo Ibrahim Foundations, the UN Development Indexes, the rampant corruption in Africa tend to erode the social economic tissues. For example, public resources are taken away from the populations instead of investing actually in health, security, so that people can have a secure platform or environment where to live. So I really believe that if Africa, particularly the leadership of Africa, and of course in support of the international community and our organizations, if we really work together in terms of how to fight corruption, there are really great chances that Africa will have a better future today, in the future, particularly in this time where climate change will be one of the biggest issues in today's global affairs. And about, Africa has a lot of resources that will be useful to transition from fossil fuel to climate change. So I really think that we should make if we make fighting corruption one of the major priority, there are chances that Africa will have a better future and the people will have a better life.
How can countries go about reducing corruption?
Here's the thing, from my modest experience looking at this, and I think I really share that view, that at some point, or we get to a point where African people themselves, particularly a leader, have to take ownership of this issue of fighting corruption. Yes, the US, UK, EU, and other international organizations can, denounce and sometimes even impose sanctions. For example, the Global Magnitsky Act in the United States that tend to, to sanction those individuals who have been involved in major corruption in developing countries and even around the world. But I think it would be more effective, even more effective, have a positive impact when African people themselves, particularly leaders themselves, take ownership in fighting corruption in their own country. Yes, the US might say something or other international organization, but it will not have the same impact as African leaders themselves really take this issue of fighting corruption seriously. And of course, without being naive, sometimes leaders, they maybe don't act in the best interest of their own people. So I think this is another part where we have to invest in civil society organizations, particularly those who are doing a great job in terms of putting pressure or holding the government accountable. And these, by the way, were one of the issues that were discussed, I think, during the US-Africa Summit, where along with democracy, fighting corruption was one of the major issues that were discussed. And as a matter of fact, it was highlighted as well in the Biden administration, because Sub-Saharan Africa strategy. And of course, we have to, we have to punish bad behavior. So when we see corruption happening, and I think here, particularly developed countries have more tools to intervene in this space, because most of the time, when African elites, let's say, steal from them on people, they tend to hide a lot of their wealth in developed countries. So we can work with international financial institutions, particularly big banks, and to understand that it's in our common interest to really hold African leaders accountable to implement equality governance, the rule of law, so that this corruption does not continue to steal, the future from the African people who I believe they really deserve better.
At the Atlantic Council, You work with the Freedom and Prosperity Center. What are the aims of this center?
What system of government actually developed for the people. The Framework Pursuit Project came out with a report last year, I think in June, around June 2022. And there were overwhelming evidences coming from all sectors of domain of economics, rule of law, quality governance. And there was a clear positive correlation between quality governance and prosperity. So, and again, keep as well, we are in a context where some people in Africa, or even around the world, they wonder, or maybe countries can develop without, let's say, necessarily having democracy. Yes, it's a very complex issue. Each country has its own reality. Maybe some countries might not, let's say, become democratic as we know it in the West. And looking at the progress that China has achieved over the past, let's say, 30 years, uplifting almost over 800 million people out of poverty. So it gives some people, maybe some sense of maybe they don't necessarily need democracy for development. And particularly for country, particularly in Africa, where the people, government, they have to, this question whether they should move to the West or stay with China in terms of choosing their own system of government. But the point for the Freedom and Prosperity Project is very simple. Historically, democracy has tended to be prosperous, more stable, and especially longer term. Having said that, there are a lot we can learn from, let's say, China, or take, for example, for Singapore. All these countries have demonstrated significant progress by the economic development over the past decades. But anyway, it's not a straightforward, let's say, response or path on how countries should choose their own method of governance. But it's just a point, I think, the center would like to make that, it's sure democracy is struggling today. You see the rise of extreme movements, whether in the US and Europe, which is questioning the future of democracy. But the point is just to make sure yes, we are struggling, and people really acknowledge that. But eventually, in the long term, democracy will prevail. And what, of course, we are hoping we'll see in developed countries is, of course, reforms, so that people don't feel really left behind. At the same time, of course, helping Africa and other developed countries to continue on the path of economic prosperity. That's really simple about the, I think the main mission objective of the Freedom and Freedom Prosperity Project.
What should we make about China's involvement in the DRC? Are they helping or hindering development?
The involvement of China in the DRC has been quite for a really long time, even back 60, but I think more poignant over the past decade, since China has been, of course, on the frontier of securing or having access and secure access to natural resources to support the economy, as the world is particularly focused on climate change. In 2008, the previous regime under Kabila, they signed this called contract DRC China deal. It was supposed to be some like $80 billion something, but what we are seeing today is, quite frankly, it was kind of a disaster, really a disaster. It seemed like only the political elites have benefited from it, but the people actually themselves, they did not actually see the result of that deal. The recent report by the DRC, Inspector Finance, it revealed that many projects were supposed to be built under the China-Congo deal, including roads, hospitals, schools. But it seemed like really less than 30% of that work was actually done. And even more, looking into the number, if we believe the report is credible, China actually tend to benefit from it more than the DRC actually in that deal. So just using that example, there are questions, really serious questions arise in terms of, is actually China helping the situation or hurting it more? So I hope personally that this will serve as a lesson learned, not only for the DRC leaders, but also for China themselves as well to do better. because this kind of involvement or this kind of example will not serve well China's, let's say, image in Africa and around the world. But also, the DRC, the leadership has to really make better deal for their own people. And from our perspective, I think international community, and as we are saying, particularly in these lenses of great power competition, I think we have to have a more pragmatic approach in a way that there are no, let's say, straightforward answer or clear answer that will be able to deliver or respond to all the complex problems that we are seeing, not only DRC, but all over Africa. But anyway, just in simple terms, there are really serious concerns about China involvement in the DRC. The deal that was signed in 2008 did not show really, concrete results in terms of infrastructure as they were promised. On the contrary, we saw a deal that actually foster and encourage corruption. There are many reports that have been published with, I think, serious allegations and evidences that the China deal actually encouraged corruption. So I like really to think that, again, from the Chinese perspective, they will take this as a case study, as an example, and they try to do better next time, something like that.
How should the United States engage with sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, as I said again previously, it's a very complex situation. There is no A plus one equal to two. So we have to look to have a coherent and comprehensive, I think, approach in terms of how we approach the sub-Saharan Africa or Africa in general. Each country has its own reality. Every other country has their own interest. But I think this is what actually really like the Biden administration national security strategy, along with a particular sub-Saharan African strategy. Meaning, we look at what is our common interest, as well looking at China and others. Great power might be interested in Africa. For example, stability of Africa, encouraging transparency, open government, because when Africa is doing well home, when African leaders are delivering for their own people in their own countries, it's posed less problem for all of us and for the rest of the world. Look at, for example, the problem of migration, Libya, Egypt, and if you're reading the news, this is the people who are running away from their own countries because they are hoping for a better life going to Europe or going abroad. So from that perspective, I think I like to think that US, China, and all other countries, we really agree on that we have to help Africa, but the African leaders to be able to deliver for their own people, create opportunity home. And I think that's where the US-African strategy kind of really nail it, without getting into this debate of ideological or political system, which one is better to deliver for the people or not. So if we really stick to that, encourage transparency, keep fighting corruption, enforcing the rule of law and equality governance, and of course, working with our allies and even our competitors such as China to make sure that Africa deliver on socioeconomic promises and opportunity, I think we'll be able to do done a very great job in that regard.
Why are you optimistic about Africa's future?
First of all, it's in many ways, first, I'm a very optimistic person by nature, no matter what. I like to think that, as one of my great mentors to say, optimism is a force multiplier. But I think with some fact, here's the thing. You look at the future of the world, particularly in this context where the world is focused on, fighting climate change. Africa will be among the center of gravity or the battleground to ensure that we successfully implement the climate change or COP27 recommendation to fight climate change from fossil fuel to climate change. And Africa, unless I'm mistaken, but has about 30% of global natural resources proven that would be useful in this endeavor. Secondly, the population. The African demography. It's the youngest continent in the world. I think above 60% of the populations. So by and large, they present opportunities and challenges. So, and I think from our perspective, we have to help Africa actually deliver on those promises, on these challenges, because by the way, if Africa is doing well, it can present even market opportunity for our companies from the Western countries to come and invest in Africa. So, and from that particular perspective, and I've always really emphasized on this one, education. We have to really invest in educating the future of African, the populations. Because quite frankly, without access to quality education, challenge will be even more complicated. But I'm seeing young people, when now I reach out or talk to some young folks from any countries in Africa, Nigeria, Congo, South Africa, Senegal, you are seeing these young people who are really, they have a hunger. They are very hungry. They want to see change. They want to be part of how the world is changing. And I like to think that if these young people full of enormous talent have access to quality education opportunity, trust me, we should not be seeing Africa as let's say, a burden or challenge, but a continent full of opportunities. And from that perspective, quite frankly, I'm very optimistic about the future of the continent. But I'd like to say as well that it's mutually beneficial for all of us. So particularly wealthy countries, we have to keep more pressure on African government to deliver for their own people, particularly investing in these young populations, in the hope that those investment in education will unleash the God-given potential and be able to be instrument of change, and not only for Africa but for the world as well.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to follow us on Twitter at @the_IATP. Also, hit the like and subscribe button below, and check out our website at www.theiatp.org.